How much does track day cost? Let's find out.
Last year, I attended my first ever HPDE driving event, and before I went out, the car needed several upgrades. So if you're looking to get out there for your first time, this is how much it costs, and let's just say it's not exactly cheap.
Before we get into any modifications, we first need to register for the event. This is going to be a variable cost because every track and every event is going to be a little bit different, but for my day out, it cost me $222. The worst part is we only ran 2 out of the 4 sessions because of the cooling issue, so I spent $222 for 40 minutes of driving time and 6 hours of standing in the cold. Your everyday insurance is not going to cover your car in the event that you wreck it out on the track, and you can buy track insurance. I didn't buy track insurance for mine, but if you have a very expensive car, it's probably wise that you might want to consider protecting it. I honestly don't even know how much it would cost you to get track insurance for the day, but if you went out for a track event and you bought insurance, let me know down in the comments below how much it ran you. Next up, safety first. Since this was my first time out, I did decide to buy a new helmet. And I want to give a shout out to other Nolan at Balt Autosports who helped me source this helmet really fast. He gave me several options for helmets, and so I ended up going with the full face RaceQuip Pro 20 in all gloss black. Something important to note is the rating of the helmet, especially if you're buying them secondhand. They need to have the correct rating for the event you're going to be participating in. RaceQuip Pro 20 is an SA2020 rating, and that's going to cover me for just about any event that I want to participate in. And the snow rating is basically the impact resistance the helmet has and also the fire resistant properties it has, so it is safe to use in a motorsports environment. And the helmet also has threaded inserts for a Hans device, which I'm gonna need when I put a roll cage and a 5-point harness in the car. The cost, $269.65. Like I said, you can rent these helmets, so the cost would be significantly lower. I think my local track is like $20 or $25 for the day, but I mean, I'm gonna be using this helmet again anyway because this WRX is a dedicated track car, so it made sense to just pick one up. And now, on to some upgrades. But first, hit that like button, and if you enjoy watching people suffer while they work on their cars, you should definitely subscribe. First up on the upgrade list, we're addressing cooling. Now, with Subarus, the OEM radiators have plastic construction on the top and the bottom, and after excessive heat cycles, they are known to crack, and I wanted to have 0 potential issues on my first day out, so we upgraded.
I upgraded to a Koyorad aluminum radiator with a 1.5-inch core, which runs $347.97.
But it didn't end there. After the swap, I went for a first test drive, and I found out that my hoses were aged and they were bulging, and the top one almost popped off. When I got home, it had barely made it, and I had to get all new OEM hoses and clamps. And once again, I want to give a shout out to Nolan at Balt Autosports because track day was only a couple days away, and I needed the hoses and the clamps that same day to get the car ready to go. So I shot him over a text, and he had everything I needed that same day. And something he also recommended was upgrading the clamp. So he fielded several cars for Grid Life, so he's got some experience in this. So he recommended the TurboSmart constant tension clamp. So they've got a constant tension on them, so they will expand and contract as the heat cycles and make sure nothing falls off. I previously had an upgraded STI cap on the car. Now, I didn't put the cap on there when I bought the car, but I found out that you cannot run that because it's a 2-way valve, and the radiator needs to be a 1-way, and the expansion tank needs to be a 2-way because of the way the system works. It can cause issues with cooling, so I also swapped that out. Lastly, my coolant overflow tank was extremely dirty and crusty, so why not buy a new one? So for the hoses, the clamps, the cap, and the new tank, it ran me $197.44. And with the radiator swap, we also did a coolant flush. So 2 bottles of Subaru Super Coolant, $59.77 from Import Image Racing. There's a couple other items that are 100% necessary if you're gonna be tracking your car, but first, I wanna give a shout out to the channel sponsor, which is Import Image Racing. They have been a huge help in getting all the parts like the brake pads, the Koyo radiator, ready for this car to get it on the track, and it wouldn't be possible without them. So if you're looking for some parts, be sure to check out the description below. There is a promo for some free swag, and if you have any questions about parts, hop in my Discord server. Next up is going to be braking, because when you're driving at high speeds, brakes are kind of important, and let's face it, the stock pads are not gonna hold up to the heat or the abuse that the track will throw at them. I'll say this with a small caveat though, because if you're taking it easy out there and it's your first time out, you probably don't need to replace your pads. However, once you're out there, it's kind of hard not to push it harder and harder each lap because you get more confidence, so highly recommended you just upgrade the pads. So I got several recommendations, and I talked to several people that were local to me and also some who compete in Time Attack Grid Life like Eric Dewey at IAG. Some of the recommendations were Hawk DTC 30s or 60s. However, on the 2011 WRX, they don't make the 30s for it because I don't have the big Brembo brakes. So I ended up going with the DTC60s in the front and then the HP Plus in the rear.
The HP Plus are not actually a true trackpad, but after discussing with Hawk directly, it was recommended to go with the 60s in the front and then the HP Pluses in the rear. Since the front is getting the majority of the braking force, the 60s hold up incredibly well and provide great feedback, modulation, and stopping power. And while the HP Plus is not a designated trackpad, they were used in the rear that have significantly less braking force applied, so for a typical day, they would hold up just fine, but you should not run them in the front. For a set of 60s, it ran me at $260.75, and for the HP Plus, it ran $115.06.
With the pads, I opted to go with a fresh set of Centric premium blank rotors for the front and the rear. I do drive the car daily, and I didn't want to have to rebed the pads between the track pads and my daily pads, so I got a fresh set because they are relatively cheap. The front rotors ran me $115, and the rear rotors ran me $112.05. When it comes to fluids, you must upgrade your braking fluid to at least a DOT4 because your braking system is going to be going through some extreme heat, and your everyday brake fluid is not going to be able to withstand that heat, and it's going to boil, and that's not going to be a fun time. In my case, I went with Motul RBF 600. Now, I used 2 bottles to do a full flush, and it's a one and done kind of thing. I don't have to do it again for a while. Add $29.78 for 2 bottles of racing brake fluid. There's also a couple other items that you can get to make your life even easier. A pressurized bleeder and a magnetic catch bottle.
With the pressurized bleeder, I was able to bleed the brake system all by myself, and it's much quicker than having somebody press the pedal while I open and close the system. I simply filled the system with both bottles, I pressurized it, and went wheel by wheel while I flushed out all the old brake fluid. You could use an old plastic bottle to catch the brake fluid, but I opted to go with a magnetic one that I could attach to a metal surface, open the bleeder valve, and sit back and relax. While these aren't a necessity, they really do make the job much easier.
The power bleeder, $74.15, and the bleeder bottle, $30.85.
That brings us to an important must-have, fresh oil. I went with Motul 300V Motorsports oil in a slightly higher weight of 5W40. This oil is specifically designed to be used in high-performance racing and is a perfect oil for the track, but I would not run this oil daily. The cost, $120.90. And lastly, track day wouldn't be possible without some E85. E85 is a little bit cheaper than 93 octane, even though I'm gonna go through it much quicker, I will save a little bit of money, and I'm guessing I spent around 50 bucks for a full tank.
The final total, with fees, parts, fluids, gas, it looks like it came out to a total of $2,027.43. Not quite that cheap to get started. Assuming your car is in great shape and you don't have to replace any hoses or clamps like I did, you don't upgrade the radiator, which really, that's a nice to have, not a must have when you're going out on the track, and you rent a helmet versus buying one, you're looking at $1,182.61, which is a little bit more adjustable to get started. If you like this video, check out this video right here where we track prep this car and see how its first track day went down.